Today, I had the incredible privilege to speak with Joe Justice, who is the founder of Wikispeed and chair of the Agile Business Institute and author of many books and just an all-around amazing person. Today, we mostly chat about digital software management, or DSM. But we get into a ton of other topics, including agility, the Teslabot, factories, and on and on and on. So check it out.
Well, hello, good sir.
Good morning to you. I love that you got the hat. You got the signature hat now. That is way better than is it kombucha?
Luckily, it's coffee. I just woke up. It's 8:02 a.m. here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I was working the night. Yeah, man. It's been good, but it's been getting up at 4 to then do work Europe time zone. And then all the way through Asia time zones. I love it. I'm so grateful to have the people interested. But yeah, sleep is getting harder to come by. So coffee fueled.
You're in a very strange location because you're kind of split right between the East and the West. So so every time is a bad time for you, more or less. So
it looks like everywhere in the world you can service 2 major global geographies, but not all 3.
Right.
If you split the world into thirds.
Interesting.
And Hawaii allows you to do the Americas, North, South, Canada, in the morning.
Right.
And then Asia in the evening, very comfortably. It works great. And you can get the gym in between, and it all works out. But Europe is horrible.
Right. Basically it's halfway around the world. So whatever time is good for them sucks for you. So yeah.
But everywhere in the world is like that. Everywhere in the world you get 2 out of 3.
That is true.
Unfortunately, I'm really hot in Europe right now. So this is just devastating. But as the coffee kicks in, I'll smile more and more because I'm thrilled to be talking to John Gibbs. I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of Dr. Know-It-All. I mean, this truly makes my week or month. So as the coffee comes in, the smile will get bigger and bigger to match my actual feelings.
There we go. Well, I was going to do an introduction. It was supposed to be nice for you. You already introduced yourself. I will just say, since I started recording before we even signed in, because I was like, I know you. We're just going to launch right into it. And yeah. So anyway, this is Joe Justice. He is the founder of Wikispeed, publisher of many books. What are you at ABI, Agile Business Institute?
The chair. The chair of that.
Yeah, I knew it was some big title, but I didn't know officially. And most importantly, amazing person and has an amazing wife. Perfect person to spend some time hanging out with in Austin, Texas, at the Cyber Rodeo. That was definitely one of the highlights of the trip, was hanging out with you guys. So.
As are you, John, and Mrs. Gibbs.
Lane, that's fine.
Mio and I had the bestest time, and luckily it was also random. We kept accidentally finding each other at all of the organized events as part of GigaFest, and then it became very intentional. Like, let's just hang out together all the time. This is absolutely perfect.
So it was a heck of a lot of fun. Yeah, it was great. So okay. So last time I did this, I was all worried, and I had like this 2-page of all these questions. This time I'm starting out with 2 general topics, and we're just going to turn loose and go. And they're both about digital self-management. So that's the good part. So you'll see that I'm actually not wearing a Dr. Know-It-All thing. This is actually my business, my tiny, tiny little startup. And we actually have, we just got a merch store launch. So it only has these shirts, but they're super cool and they have the logo. Anyway, so I'll put that in the description. And of course, along with all of your information, which will all be in the description, so you can contact Joe as if you have time for more consulting gigs right now.
Depending on time zone, we absolutely can.
Oh, well, there you go. So anyway, but yeah, I want to talk about one thing that's a bit of a selfish deal, which is Tesla is currently a 100,000 plus employee company. Yeah. They make hardware, of course, with software integrated. they're at one end of the extreme scale. We are at the opposite end of the extreme scale. We are 2 people plus a couple of part-time people, and we make software. And so I want to get you, and my partner, he wrote me all these questions because I was like, I'm going to be talking to Joe Justice. And he was like, dude, ask these questions. So anyway, so I want to ask you that for selfish reasons. And I think other people would like to know how soon is Agile a good idea when you're starting a company? And then the other question is, and I've started calling this the machine that makes the machine that makes the machine, which is digital self-management allows the factory that allows whatever product it is you're producing. So I want to talk about how digital self-management works in as much depth as you want to go into and you're allowed to go into. But I think you can actually talk about this because you haven't had to deal with this. It was not announced at the time that you were an employee at Tesla, but the Teslabot and how that is actually a completely natural extension of DSM, because it's much, much faster. It's much more capable of handling the instantaneous feedback. And basically the factory, in my mind, becomes its eyeballs. So it has an entire factory worth of eyeballs as opposed to us poor humans that only have 2. And so anyway, so those are the topics I want to talk about. So start wherever you want. And we can talk about the Ford video too. I thought that was fantastic. If you don't know, Joe has his own channel and he just did one on the Ford F-150 Lightning factory. And it was brilliant. And there was so much stuff that I learned. Only what, like 15 or 16, I mean, it was like really short, but like super, super informative. So yeah.
You're way too kind, John. Well, this is why I love to hang out with you. The angle of your questions comes from, well, and comments come from such a diverse and well-informed background that your questions are thrilling.
Cool.
In this case, it's questions, but many times also your answers to my questions.
And feel free. I'm happy to, at this point, I figure I'm the neophyte learning from the master, but if you want to ask questions, I'm happy to answer those too.
That is so completely the opposite of true, the neophyte learning from the master. You're hilarious. What we may be seeing is a pink arrow
yes.
that says innovate at the top.
Yes.
Maybe. Okay. This is about when to start Agile. And actually, I think I can connect this to DSM.
Okay.
And actually, maybe even the Ford story. Maybe they all fit. Maybe they can reasonably fit in this narrative.
Ties
at the
together.
bottom of this pink arrow is something called waterfall.
Okay.
And waterfall is what happens when we make a budget in advance. I will propose a actually unique definition, and I actually think it's the best one now that I've seen what I've seen. That waterfall means you have a longer than a year budget.
Right.
And what this does is you have more than a year budget. Leadership in most companies means dictating budgets years in advance. That's normal. Most companies around the world use what's called waterfall. And here's what happens. General Motors, GM commits $400 million US to new Canadian battery materials plant for Ultium platform. What happens? Waterfall companies announce funding releases years in advance. This locks up funding, requiring delegation and politicking over months to adapt financial commitments to changing environments like the ongoing chip shortage. This is the fundamental miss in the Ford Lightning plant. There is no additional accommodations that I've ever seen in traditional manufacturing. It looks like an absolute waterfall manufacturing facility. They're planning to make the same thing the same way for 5 to 11 years.
Right.
So what happens if a dramatic improvement becomes available at a reasonable cost? They can't take advantage of it. Right. Meanwhile,
and I think you even physically showed that how they had 6 bays that they could drive the trucks out of, but it narrowed to a gooseneck, so there's only one truck that could fit through at a time, and so there's no way to modularize that. Yeah. Okay.
You understand me perfectly. Wow, I love talking to you, John. Even when I very poorly articulate something,
No, that was perfect. I love it. And the waterfall idea is great. It's like, so you've got a budget and it has to fall down the cliff, basically. That's the metaphor. So yeah.
And basically it's set up to be as expensive as possible to change, to try to limit change, to make it easier to manage. I mean, there's a good reason for waterfall, to make it easier to manage. It's easier. You can almost fire and forget with waterfall. You very nearly can, but you can't change it at a reasonable cost. And Porsche ran into that. Porsche Taycan production temporarily halted over the Ukraine crisis. Their wiring harnesses were made in the Ukraine. The war in Ukraine was not predicted in the 9-year budget for the Volkswagen Group.
Right.
And unfortunately, Sony and Honda, the exact same thing. They announce a bucket of money and tell their engineers, deliver electric vehicles by 2025. And the engineers are saying, well, we don't know if that's possible.
Right.
In fact, we can't know until we're doing it. Like, it's impossible to know in advance. I guess that means we're working nights and weekends until 2025. And this is why the Japanese have a word for death by overwork. Like, that's what this is. So that's waterfall. So how do you break out of waterfall, where you have all features that are planned, and then you're going to analyze that plan, and you're going to release funds at the end of each of these phases? This is also called a phase gate delivery. Well, you split into parallel executing phases, modules, just like you said, John. I mean, we understand each other. For some people, this might be a completely new concept watching this video. So instead of having all features in the same budget, you have a separate budget, and as much as you can, an independent organization, a module of the same company with its own procurement, its own test, its own planning.
So to put this, like, just to concretize this for a second, if we were talking about automobile manufacturing, one module might be the batteries, one module might be the frame, one module might be the software. I mean, the OS that runs the thing. So that kind of thing, right? So you're splitting it up so that it's not one gigantic monolithic thing. Okay, cool.
No, part of where DSM comes into play, and it does more than one useful thing in our story, is it further reduces dependencies between these groups.
Okay.
So a delay in one doesn't become a delay in the other. And more importantly, very often if you have a hardware group and a software group, which isn't necessarily the best split, but a lot of companies start that way, is software says, well, we can't write our embedded software until we know what the hardware is. What's the compute power? What sensors are going to be there? And the hardware people say, we can't specify hardware until we know what the software is going to ask. Right. This happens all the time. So part of what DSM does is enforce interfaces and say, look, don't be lazy. You don't need to know the processing spec of the hardware. You just need to know it's at least this much.
Okay.
And that this much needs to be a lot. It needs to be a high number, so you have excited, motivated engineers. And the vice versa, same for the hardware people. Look, here is your drawing of the 40 different calls you need to make to the software.
Right.
Tell me this, tell me that. And here's the format of your response. You don't need to know how the software does that. You don't even know exactly how long it's going to take. You're not making an analog system.
Right.
You're going to make your request and you're going to look for answers. You're going to sniff for answers. You'll be alerted when there's answers. This is your API, your application programming interface.
So that's what I was going to ask. So basically, and coming from the software end of things, I noticed with the Ford video, you talked about having, I think it was a stable something interface, that you were talking about the battery specifically, but basically, I think in terms of software, you say, like, you're going to pass into a library, you're passing in parameters X, Y, Z, and you're getting back parameters A, B, C. It makes no difference what happens inside that library module. So, and that's what you're saying. You can do that in hardware too. You say, as long as this battery has these 3 inputs and this output, and they're like this, and they're going to be stable like that, it doesn't matter what happens inside the battery. Okay.
And if the interface is well designed, the battery voltage can be different than the system voltage, because you don't say, I need this voltage. You say, I need to ask what the voltage is here. Right.
Okay.
Now I don't know.
So it's even more clever than I was thinking. Right. Okay. Yeah.
I actually bet that's exactly what you're thinking, John.
No, I
You're
thought
so
about
humble.
it, because of course it can ask and it can say what's the voltage and then adjust based on what the response that it gets. So that's fantastic.
Which is what Tesla does. Which is why when people are saying, what? Could Cybertruck switch to 800 volt? Won't they have to remake all the supercharger network? Which is a very intelligent question.
Right.
No, in Tesla's case, they don't. In Tesla's case, the whatever the charging source and Tesla talk to each other, they make a handshake. What's your voltage? What's your amperage? What's your voltage and amperage range? And actually, they're dynamically throttled for optimum charging. But I'm not sure if any other company does that yet. It looks like they all fix those. Moving past waterfall,
right.
Many companies will go through a 30-day budgeting cycle. That's what we call Scrum. Scrum is the gateway to Agile. It's actually the least Agile method, but it works great to move from waterfall because it's like a little waterfall. Waterfall companies understand it. You have these sprints, these little waterfalls. And
so you got, instead of this, you've got
yes. Like skipping stones. So we're moving way better. And that's way too slow for Tesla now. Tesla goes to Agile, which is real-time budgets, budget length at your discretion. And the original definition of Agile for budgeting was a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. Now, Tesla is doing multiple times a day, 60 times a day, actually, is what it is now. So they've blown past the original definition of Agile. So do we call Tesla Agile anymore? I'm not sure. I call it Agile at Tesla. And that takes us all the way up here. So then the first comment that you led with is, John, you've got your business, and it's not 100,000 people like Tesla yet. Yet.
Not yet.
Does it make sense to be Agile already? Agile is pace of innovation. And the first enabler of that is budgeting cycle. Okay. Now, in a tiny company, a lot of the time, people budget just by looking at the bank account. Because
that's literally what we do. We're like, can we afford that? Yeah, okay, we'll do that.
Right. And actually, that is the most nimble, it is the highest innovation way to run a company. So of course, you would start that way naturally. The trick is to get as big as Tesla or even bigger and still do that. Tesla does not make budgets. Instead, it's looking at the bank account. So how do you socialize that information so everyone can see it in real time and see the same information? And it's not, well, this department did a financial audit 3 months ago, and that's the best data we have. And they're not sharing it with this other department because there's a power struggle going on, which is normal. Like that's how broken most companies are.
Hey, so, I teach at a university. We're still trying to get a grant money that was given to us 2 months ago. It's still trying to be put into an account that we can spend it out of. So, I mean, it's as far away from Agile as you can possibly get. So.
The pain is real, folks. The pain is real.
It's terrible.
Well, and that tells us that university is normal, one. So, I mean, we can't feel too bad. And two, that tells us what our sprint length is, our delivery cycle. We can't sprint faster than we can budget. So maybe the principal investigator model of traditional academia is not too far off because it's tied to the current budget cadence.
Right.
And that's real.
Yeah. But that does I mean, universities literally have a fiscal, they're like starting on fiscal day 1, you have 365 days to spend this money, and then we'll figure out next year. And it's, you have no ability to even adjust when the fiscal year starts and stops. That's what happens.
And I think that's why companies look elsewhere for innovation now.
Probably.
So I'd say you're Agile already, John, if you're looking at the bank account daily. So, and then the question is, do you want to maintain that agility? Well, there's a chapter in my book, Scrum Master, about that. And it's what most companies do to get big is they find an exploit. And I intentionally use that word. And what I mean is their thing that they can profit on right now. And they scale up an ability to extract value from that thing. And I say exploit because if we don't revisit what value means, we can overexploit and lose the value creation, damage the environment, make enemies, et cetera. So I do intentionally say exploit, like be careful. Do you really want to do 100% harvest of hardwood trees? Maybe that's a really poor idea in terms of the environmental ramifications and even your own value stream. Maybe you want to leave replant capability, but that's how companies get big. Then how companies get disrupted is when they lose the ability to be agile. They have year-long or longer budgets on their exploit cycle, and their ability to exploit changes. There's a war in Ukraine. There's a chip shortage. There's a beetle that it becomes a disease in the hardwood trees in the area they have permission to harvest, whatever it is. These companies then die, and they die fast. And now thousands of people get unemployed simultaneously. It is bad. It is the thing we don't want in the world. So what you do is you keep Agile, and this is part of what Scrum, the training wheels for Agile, introduces. Product owners. Product owners' job is to continually, every day, reassess the value scenario. Now, Scrum's more than 20 years old. It's missed some things that are pretty obvious now. One of them is real-time budget feedback. That's nowhere in Scrum. In fact, Agile hints about it, but we didn't know that well 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Now, what the product owner has evolved into in something like Tesla, they don't call them product owners anymore, is you have real-time budget feedback. Everyone does, but by definition, you have real-time budget feedback, and you're making daily instant allocations in real time. What is value now? Which is why in the chip shortage Tesla group. So John, you're absolutely agile now, in my opinion, by Joe Justice's definition. Your consultancy is phenomenally agile. To keep that, you'd keep the ability in, I'd say by now, a very agile standard is in less than a day. Know what the total money in the company is and be able to make a spend decision up to 100% of that available, up to 100% of the total balance.
It's just fascinating because everyone keeps telling us, of course, they're like, you need to set a budget, you need to do all this stuff, you need to have these business plans. And my personal feeling is honestly to do it more like you're saying. It's like, I don't know. It's sort of like the way I personally live life. You know, you look in the bank and you're like, can I afford that pretty new toy? And you're like, nope. So, not today, but if we want to save up for it, then we can maybe get it next month. So, that's fascinating. So I guess the sort of corollary with this is the digital self-management, because there is a huge upfront cost, in my understanding, to create that system. And so, but the opposite, the payoff is that system allows you to be super agile, or whatever it is that Tesla's got this multiple times per day updating, as opposed to even regular agile, which is once every month. So I think, like, I guess the question then becomes, like, when does it make sense to put in the effort to do DSM in your company, as you grow from 2 people to 100,000? Tesla did not start with that, right? They didn't start with digital self-management, right? Because it wasn't even really a thing back then. So
the first I talked to anyone in Tesla in any detail was 2010 during the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize. And then in 2011, when the Model S frame was unveiled to the world, and consulted then to put it as strongly as possible on increasing modularity in what became the Model S. And I didn't hear about any DSM visible to the employees at that time. Now, it may have been already early lead prototypes, but it definitely wasn't as immediately apparent as it is now. I mean, it's shockingly obvious as an employee. You're using it every minute, if not second. Or almost it's using you.
Well, and I think that's correct. It is a cyborg. The entity is a cyborg. It's not just people. I noticed that in the Ford video, that they have a bunch of screens now, but their screens all look like they just had a Ford logo on it or something. And then you look at that compared to, like, the paint shop, the ones that you were able to freeze frame on in the Tesla videos. And there's all this information in this screen. And I assume in your phone also, you can look at your phone and it's telling you things. I was fascinated when you said that the Tesla uses iMessage. Like, you literally get on your phone and go, like, AI, do this. And it's like, okay. So,
it's almost all iMessage or Signal, the encrypted app Signal, because everything else is too slow. To open up email, you change context.
Right.
And you are doing things. The goal is for 100% of people to be physically working on improving, changing cars. That's the goal. So anytime you're laptoping, your context is different. And so it's all phone-based, almost all phone-based. I was almost never on a laptop, maybe 15 minutes a day, maybe less. out of 12 hours. And really I was in an hour to 2 hours early and an hour to 2 hours late. So I mean, really out of a 24-hour period.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost all phone, and email again is too slow. You like dig in mentally, your context switches. And context.
Well, and I can feel like when you write an email, there's a sense in which you have to have some formality to it. Like a hi, hello, how's your day going? Some small talk. And so it's all a waste of time in terms of like just trying to be as fast as humanly possible, right? A message gives you that context where you're just like, I need this. And you can just shoot that off instantly. So yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Interesting. I wonder if it's actually just social norms that slow email down to a different context, like a letter writing context.
There's no reason why, especially on your phone, why the email app couldn't be just as fast. But I think there is an assumption that you're going to communicate more formally with someone when you email them. So I don't know.
Sirs and gentle ladies of the court.
Yeah, well, then that's it is that sort of thing where you sort of. Yeah, but I understand the context switching because since I have pretty significant ADD, I also have the opposite end of that, which is when I focus down, it's like incredible focus. And if I have to come out of that, it's like digging myself out of a hole to get back up to the surface and then go over here and do something else. And it's not just a time thing, it's a mental energy thing. It's just a huge amount of mental energy that's wasted getting out of this and then going over here and then trying to get back into it again. And you're like, damn it, I was like in the flow and I don't remember what I was doing now. So, yeah.
Elon Musk agrees with you. Context switching loss is the mind killer.
Yeah. To quote Dune, someplace back here, we'll have to redo that. Context switching loss is the mind killer, the little death. So, yeah.
Thank you, Frank Herbert.
Yeah. Man. Somebody, I think it was Stephen Mark Ryan, just asked on Twitter what your favorite book was. And I was like, absolutely Dune. I've gone back to that book at least a half a dozen times in my life, starting when I was Paul's age, 14 was the first time I read it. And so, your perspective changes as you become the dad's age and older. So, anyway, so let me ask, I do want to get back to talking about when it makes sense for a company to do DSM, but you were so on it about this whole context switching and how fast you can make changes that I really want to latch onto that for a second and talk about the Teslabot. Because now that I'm seeing this, my whole understanding, I was thinking as a consumer, I was like, oh, what a fun toy to have. And now I'm like, no.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, it will be. But I'm like, no, this is not why Tesla started working on this. It's because it is the ultimate digital self-management, because it just literally is the factory. It becomes the factory, or it has the opportunity. It doesn't exist yet, but or at least I've heard there's some actual prototypes wandering around, but I have no idea for real. But
the DSM is introduced anytime there's waiting on someone else. Okay. And the idea there is context is being broken and there's waiting. So if I'm in paint, which I was frequently,
right,
and I try a new chemical mix, and I didn't say this in the DSM video because unfortunately to my mind, once you've done things for hundreds of hours, you think it's obvious. Right. That doesn't mean it is. It means you were there for hundreds of hours, right? Yeah. And so to me, it's obvious. Of course, we were mixing new paint compounds every day. Of course, we were using different robotic nozzles on the ends of the robots, different clothes on the robot every day. And those all affect paint. Different cure cycles, different lengths of time in the ovens, different temperature ramps, different post-treatments during cure cycles every day, experimenting relentlessly to drive down time in paint and increase luster, customer seed value, longevity, environmental performance, reduce cost, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a lot of different masters to serve.
Yeah. And it becomes easy because of DSM.
Okay.
So typically, once you get something right, you don't change it. You freeze it in traditional manufacturing. That's the idea. This will make the same thing every time the same way. So get it right. So now you have this big setup phase. Then you get it right and you don't touch it. And if it gets out of calibration and starts making things wrong. That's a huge event. It's a panic attack. Bring in the experts, shut down the line, right. Send all the idiots home we hired to just press the red button all day. And you get all this bad culture of classism and everything.
Right.
This is the downside of Tayloristic management. And the hilarious black and white videos of people being dehumanized and demonized. And it actually is awful.
Right.
Well, what you wish you had is an expert right there to say, actually, it just got a little bit better. Actually, it just got a little bit worse.
Right.
Or it got a lot better or a lot worse. And the problem is that expert assessment for something like car paint would take a day. Really, for every part of one car, it would take a day. Well, DSM does it in less than a second. So instead of waiting on an expert to say, I just changed this robot's nozzle, was that a good thing or a bad thing? You know immediately. I mean, as soon as one pass on one car is done, sometimes even faster than that.
Right.
And that allows you to be making these changes 60 times a day with confidence. Right. And it also makes you an expert because you can say, I tried 60 different robot nozzles today. I understand this type of dynamic is happening. There's this type of helical formation like DNA strands as these things bond to the surface. We didn't think that's how these chemicals behave, but it looks like that's what's going on. By the way, I now know more about this aspect of coatings than any of the PhD papers I read over the last month, because I've been trying to read at least N number a day on this, on coatings topics. You're like, I am the world's most informed person. The only reason why is because your feedback loop is so fast.
Right.
So DSM, this is also the problem with DSM, is it's absolutely currently task specific. It's not AGI. It's not general intelligence.
Interesting.
So you have a DSM stack for each of these questions you're trying to get fast feedback on.
Right.
So you don't wait on anyone. If you say, I want to spend money on a new FANUC robot,
right,
there is part of the system that says, here's where FANUC current capabilities are phenomenal and a great idea. But that's different than these other potentially emerging technologies that don't have a DSM stack for them yet. So when would you introduce DSM? When you have many requests that are waiting for an amount of time that is less than the cost to create DSM over the length you think you'll get a request of that type. And what that does mean is immediately. You want as much DSM as you can, as fast as you can, because that is your one and true core company advantage.
Right. Okay. So really, I mean, literally even now with just the two of us, because we'll be like, hey, what do you think about this? And the person's having lunch or something. And, you know, you wait an hour or 90 minutes and, you know, what I'm just saying. So literally from the beginning, it makes sense to do it as much as possible. So.
And that is your one saleable asset as a company, not your contacts list and not your PowerPoint deck. I mean, I hope no one's using PowerPoint anymore, but whatever it is. And I can just hear the mass outcry. I'm still using PowerPoint. What is he thinking? But okay, but anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually your DSM stack, because that's what you could sell to another person who wants to play in the domain for huge amounts of money, because the cost to create and train that is currently inordinate. So that is your exit strategy, is license.
Even more than the product itself. It's like,
oh, way more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the machine that builds it's the rules engine for the machine that builds the machine. Right. I love the Twitter hashtag going around, GigaFSD. Yeah. It's the full self-driving for the Gigafactory. I mean, absolutely. But not even just the Gigafactory. I mean, it's essentially the thought process. And this is what ties us to Teslabot.
Right.
So Teslabot is a human form factor ability to move approximately 20 kilograms around through the Da Vinci.
Right. Vitruvian Man, right?
Vitruvian human. Man.
I think it's
Vitruvian Man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. And that's a really elegant thing for what humans are used to thinking about, that's really good. And it has wonderful legacy known stable interface. Everything we've already developed around the human form factor has a chance to work well with Teslabot. And that's really smart. Now, what makes it decide what to do? You don't want it following rote scripts if you want any innovation.
Right.
And because DSM has already been built in a very, very large set of complementing stacks, many drawing from root libraries that can be trained for different.
Oh, so you've got a root like method, and then you overfit to specific area. Okay, that makes sense.
As much as you can. I mean, there's some full unique stuff, I think, but it looks like.
But it makes sense. I mean, there's so many things depend on vision. So having a root vision stack that then feeds off into a whole bunch of different, like not just paint, but I assume also the body shape, things like that, where it can, or X-ray or whatever it needs to be.
You hit the biggest one, John, and you know it. So every sound can be visual sound waves. Every smell can be waves on different olfactory sensors. Every tactile experience can be sets of visualized waves. Everything humans can perceive can be put into single photon counts at a wavelength. Right. Everything. And that's phenomenally high resolution, more than most of us can become anywhere near conscious of. That is what Tesla Vision is really good at doing, is taking any waveform per photon count and per waveform, and then labeling it. Right. What am I seeing? And then that as a core is good. It's actually quite good now. Right. That then you have labeled environment. Now you can have all of these custom stacks to say what's useful for me to try to decide about this. And Teslabot is now a physical actor on it. And that is truly as fun as any science fiction book any of us have read. Right. Like it's really that good.
Yeah.
And I don't think most of us have allowed ourselves the childlike freedom to dream of how really interesting this emergent property could be. But Musk clearly has, because Musk isn't even trying to justify it. People are like, what are you going to do with it first? And Musk's like, we'll find something valuable to do. And then will you put it in the factory? And Musk like thinks for a moment, because this was novel at the time.
Right.
Well, if we can't find something good to do with it, then it's probably not good anywhere, because the core is this is good for everything or bad for everything. I mean, this is changing for everything. Right. Like, this is truly fundamental. Like, what would happen if we gave humans thumbs? You know, like this is a big thing.
Right. We're all walking around like,
And I love the niche gamer type posts. Well, what does it look like in leather? And yeah, I mean, I'm sure all that's going to happen too. I mean, people are people, but
yeah, we all, I mean, even Elon said that. Somebody asked him that question. He's like, look, yes, eventually it's going to happen. It has to happen.
At the limit of technology, it all leads back to sex. I mean, I hope that's not, actually, no, it's probably true. Have you ever listened to American English music? And the same is probably true of all English, regardless of accent. It's nearly 100% about sex.
Oh, yeah. Music. Oh, yeah. Our limbic systems are pretty major contributors to what happens in life. So
yeah, the limbic, optimizing for the limbic system seems to have at its core idiocracy as the major contributors, unless you really focus on innovation over your lifetime.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know if you've read The Expanse, the book series, but you know, the author keeps referring to human beings as murder apes. And I'm like, yeah, that's about right. We always have to try really hard to overcome that. So.
You know, I think most of the time as a civilization, we do a pretty good job.
Yeah. But so, wow. So I think about the Teslabot in terms of, I guess I hadn't really thought about that in the magical way that you're talking. Why not let it be magical? Like, to actually see this thing walk around, even if it's just picking up boxes and moving it from one side of the factory to the other, that's magic. It's like, that's really cool. Oh man, I don't know. that makes me happy for the future. I guess what it makes me want to do is go on like a factory tour. I'm like, can I please go on a factory tour and see one of these things walking around? I mean, honestly, even without that, just going to be able to do I mean, I don't know. Sometime when you go, just hire me as your cameraman and I'll come and do it. You can hire me for 1 penny and I'll just be the guy like just shooting all the stuff as you walk through the factory. But you know, it is fascinating to think about this. I think we consumers, not you because you've spent so much time in this, but we consumers just often get, you know, we're like, oh, cool, iPhone. And we don't think like, oh my gosh, what goes into creating this thing? All the way from like, where the hell do you get the raw materials up to final assembly, you know, just the logistical chain that is involved in creating this. And I think Apple, I don't know what you would say about it, but it seems to me like they're not particularly agile since they only are introducing one new iPhone or Mac per year. It seems like they're kind of more stuck in that older system.
Now, Apple under Jobs had a mitigation that actually made them in effect agile.
Okay.
What I only worked with the firms that designed the labs for Apple. I didn't work directly in Apple. So I'd love to say I worked with Steve Jobs. I didn't.
Yeah.
But what I heard, and whatever. Ashley Vance's biography of Jobs says the same thing. So I believe it to be audited. You know, I multiple corroborating sources. Is Apple internally uses massive parallel concurrent development under Jobs anyway, and every day. And this matches how the labs were built when I was working with the group to design and manufacture the labs. Is Jobs walked in a circle around the labs, and he would hold up different prototypes, more than 20 every day of, for example, an iPhone, an early iPhone, every day. And they would have software running on them, a screen, they could be usable.
Right.
And Jobs would randomly use them. Well, I mean, unprepared, use them. Maybe Jobs had an
He just shows up and he's like, give me the thing. So
yeah. And then there's more than 20 of them because there's more than 20 labs. And this is what I saw when I was working with the array. They're in a radius around the central
hub. That may
hub.
explain the donut shape of the new Apple, you know. I mean, that way you just keep walking forever.
The campus is arranged for this, for Jobs to walk. Right. And he would interact with one. And then he would say to each lab, okay, this aspect, I need more of this, or this is the one winner.
Okay.
Because Jobs is directly setting charismatically the answer, Jobs was famous for being harsh, but also not for making someone feel bad if they failed with a good idea.
Right.
So he'd be like, okay, you didn't get picked, but it doesn't mean you're not awesome. Right. But if someone truly did something dumb, Jobs also famously would say, that was dumb, you're fired. Right. I mean, he was also famously like that too.
Right.
Each day he would essentially pick a winner, but also growth points. You know, what do I need to see more of tomorrow?
Right.
And the teams would have 24 hours to enact as much of that as possible every day.
Right.
And it did make a less than 1 year cadence. Now the labs might be funded with mass budget for a year, but Jobs had authority to pull from reserves dynamically to the point that it was actually fully agile.
Okay. Wow.
Now, what seems to have happened under Cook is there was no one to unify the labs, and they can't even figure out one charge connector.
Right.
Like I'll buy a phone and a laptop, and they don't use the same headphone.
Right.
And they don't even have a headphone that connects to each other. I cannot charge one from the other out of the box. I have to get a separate adapter. Like that is completely indicative of the inner competition within Apple, where everyone's allowed to win and no one's making the hard decision. Right. Which is Cook's leadership style, is placating the other awesome personalities instead of asserting a unification that's ultimately better for the consumer.
Right.
And what that's made is a lack of agility, because now each of these groups has n number of months, and it's actually more than years, for their next product to emerge on a cadence.
Right.
And they're not even drawn back into using the same interface. Right. I mean, it's using Conway's law. It's easy to see the dysfunction of the lack of unification and lack of inspirational vision that Jobs' departure left, because you did not have an agile company. You did not have digital self-management.
Right.
You had a powerful personality. So it can only last as long as the powerful personality. Now, this is actually a much more interesting end game or mid game for DSM. Someday, Elon Musk will rapture and move out into the metaverse and no longer be corporate.
Right.
X.com, the idea is to be a rule-keeping company for all the other Musk companies to say you're still on mission.
Right.
You're not useless. You're not missing the point anymore.
Right.
How do you do that? DSM for X.com is the AI measuring system, and it's evolving now for, are these companies contributing to their mission? Is their mission still meaningful? Because at some point, there will be no gasoline or diesel vehicles. The world will have transitioned to sustainable energy. What should Tesla do next?
Right.
I mean, you could imagine a corrupt firm doing something awful with that. Well, you've achieved the mission, so you have these charismatic leaders come in and be like, now we're going to make this awful thing. What is the DSM that is even able to help audit and help come up with new awesome transcendent goals to continue the master plan? And that's the ultimate DSM for X.com. The exciting thing about the world we're in now is that's still emerging.
Right. And that's very cool. One thing, just for people who are watching who may be confused, X.com, of course, was the thing that Elon started way back in the 90s. The new X.com is like X Holdings Corporation or whatever the thing is that's partially buying Twitter also. But anyway, it's his master company thing. So yeah. Wow. I want to go back a little bit because this tied in when you were talking about like the building and we were thinking about the torus shape of the Apple campus and all that stuff. You, in one of your videos, talked about I think it was the Fremont factory, and you were like, no, maybe it was Giga Nevada. You were like, here's a tent, and then they're going to use this tent, and they will literally tell the architects what they need this building to look like, and they'll build it around them. And that, I mean, I was like, is this agile architecture? I mean, instead of going like, here, factory, go, where you have some outside entity which creates this factory for you, you're talking about like, you're actually literally building this factory as people are using it. And it's the architecture and the functionality is changing as, yes, that's the picture. Yeah. So I don't know. I talk more about this because I just find that I always think like you get a building and you walk into the building and you have the building and that sucks for you, you make do, but that's not Tesla's way.
Giga Nevada is Gigafactory version 1, arguably.
0.5, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really different than what went up in Berlin. You can see the commonalities. You can see the line of thinking. And then much different again from, hi, Miho. I just got more coffee. Yeah,
all right. Hey, hi. Konnichiwa.
Miho's staying off camera.
There we go.
You want to say hi? Hi. That's as close as we're going to get, I think.
Awesome.
How's Lane?
She's doing great. She's in a meeting upstairs with her startup company. Yeah.
So these huge cubes that Nevada's built out of are way under optimized compared to, well, this is the whole point. It's not like the Gigafactory was designed and then rolled out in different geographies. That's not the Tesla way. Like even each of these cubes is an enhancement over the previous one. So of course, they're
cube number one.
Different.
Yeah, cube number 1 is not nearly as good as cube number 10 or something. Yeah.
Yes, it is fully emergent. And it's because of, John, what you just taught us. It starts in a tent, and that's engineering in there. That's people with laptops and machines. They're making batteries. They're designing new batteries. They're pasting. I mean, I don't know how many people realize making batteries is really kind of like mixing a jar of peanut butter. I mean, with a lot of rolling.
Right. It's like those, what were those old jelly rolls that you could get, like the really awful snacks that you could buy in the store? It's like a giant jelly roll.
Yes. It's like a giant tablets now, a tablets jelly roll.
There you go, tablets jelly roll.
So that's happening there. And construction happens around them. Now, Tesla does not have this class-based system where there's the construction people and then there's us engineers. They take turns. I mean, you're an employee. You're going to do everything that you reasonably can towards the company mission. I mean, that's your job as an employee.
Right.
So if that means learning to inspect construction welds, then that's what that means. And if you're learning to inspect something, that means you're also going to learn to do it.
Right.
So you're going to be doing construction welds. And that means you need to know how to operate the hoist to get the beams in place and measure that they're in place and how to. So, I mean, you become full stack very quickly.
This really isn't like, it's not like you're hiring some external company. I mean, obviously there are pieces of that, but you're literally like, as an employee, it's like, no, put that I-beam up there and put it in place and weld it. And you're like, I've never done that before. And they're like, well, figure it out.
So. Yes, exactly that. And the emergent property, the emergent capability of this type of cross-functionality and continuous increasing cross-functionality is you can design your own stuff as you go. So this cube is built with feedback from the people doing the engineering, as John just told all of us. And they take turns. So that's how you get feedback, not by stopping and having a meeting. Right. I mean, the work never stops, right? But by switching role is how you get feedback, by doing it, right? Which is like mob, rotating driver. And when this cube is done, some of those people are naturally going to go to the next cube, but some aren't. They're going to stay in this current one working. And so you get by osmosis learning.
Right.
And the factory grows. You can see the cubes reaching towards their final shape. Now, we also do this on top of buildings, which is what's called modular Z construction, where the structures are fortified first, and we build on top. This is how Fremont is done because it's a legacy building. So reinforcements are added and built on top. This is from Fremont.
Okay.
That's SpaceX.
Well, I mean, SpaceX is actually a really good example because, like, you've got the picture of I think it's a rocket garden behind you. But if you look at Hoppy, it's literally a water tower out of, I mean, just like, it looks like garbage. It looks like you or I don't know, you probably would do a good job. It looks like I built that thing. And now they look so sleek. And I think when they started building this, people are like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous.
Are you capable? Are you capable? I mean, just look at it. Right. And people don't understand innovation.
Right. Well, at least not that kind of innovation.
We're used to seeing the polished waterfall product.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
5, 7, 11 years down from inception, which is okay. But what if you want to innovate this week?
Right. Well, and maybe one of the best things, I think it's kind of random luck, but because SpaceX is on a public access road, they don't really have a choice. It's like people are going to see it. And so we get to actually see all the warts, all the failed attempts, serial number 15, serial number 20, it's like, oh, whoop, that didn't work. Go to the rocket garden, so, but it's absolutely fantastic to get an insight. I'm sure inside the factory, as you worked inside Tesla, I'm sure you saw the same thing. It's just, there's walls around it, so you can't really see it as well from the outside. So
yeah, buying Fremont was a huge risk for Musk. And Musk made it work. I still don't know if that was ultimately the best decision, but I wasn't the one making it. Who am I to judge?
Right.
But if I were in Musk's shoes, I don't know if I would have made that call. But Musk made it work. So you had a plant that was laid out for single one-piece continuous flow for Toyota Production System, which is completely alien to Tesla's multi-dimensional hexagons. And Musk made it work. But what that means is you weren't working on the poured concrete platforms, floors and above the floors.
Right.
You're working on suspended steel mezzanines to be where you need to be. You're basically floating in space. It would have been floating in space before. So you're on like mezzanine. I mean, with safety rails, it meets OSHA, but I mean, you're just floating. And it means often there's a concrete wall, like a big one, like poured pilings for something that was there for GM 40 years ago, where you really want to be. So you're working around this stuff. It's a fundamentally non-agile architecture. It was a master planned flow architecture, which made a lot of sense for what people knew 40 years ago.
Right.
But it doesn't apply to Musk model. This in SpaceX is an ideal innovation environment. You have a sprung tent over a dirt floor. Like, that's actually what you want. And it's a dirt floor, so you don't worry about burning it when you're welding a prototype, right? Or you spill some molten aluminum when you're pouring something to try a new way to make a grid fin.
Right.
Like you just don't worry about it. Like, this is actually what you want. Now, the downside of a dirt floor, this actually may be poured concrete, but I think it's dirt, is it's harder to roll carts around, and this stuff's heavy. So you actually do eventually want a thick poured concrete floor just so you can roll things around on wheels.
Right.
And then you want overhead gantry cranes and forklifts around because you're working with big things. But besides that this is the ideal environment. This is the dream. And I love how SpaceX now has a farm of Airstream trailers. So you have like kind of a cushy place to go take a break. But that's it.
Got some air conditioning, baby. Yeah. So yeah, wow. It's kind of crazy because I remember, when they were going through production hell in 2017, 2018 for the Model 3, and those tents started appearing outside Fremont. And I was part of the group of people going, what is going on? They've just lost their minds. They've gone completely crazy. And it turns out that, what you're saying here is that was genius. It was exactly what needed to be happening. And super agile building that's built up as you need it and can be moved as you need it and readjusted as you need it or expanded as you need it, whatever it is that you need. So, wow.
Star Factory is being built now, and that's still, the tent is the ultimate in agility in my assessment, still having worked in it and around it in Fremont. The sides are dynamically opened up at any area for inputs and outputs flowing across agile lines as they innovate. It is phenomenal. And it's temperature controlled to the better than the legacy concrete building.
Really?
It's truly phenomenal.
Wow.
I was looking to buy a set of sprung structures myself for my own solar powered factory experiment in the desert. However, Musk continued to prioritize expanding the Gigafactory model, and Starbase is now becoming Star Factory as well. It continues to grow. So I'm very interested for myself to much better understand what advantage does this give. I'm not seeing it yet. Even looking around the different gigafactories and going to Austin with you, there's 80 feet of height, but you can build up walls on these sprung structures to take them 80 feet or pylons. I'm still not entirely sure, and I'm really pumped to learn. So for everybody who has theories on what is the advantage in terms of pace of innovation, what's the pace of innovation increase? Because that is the only thing that matters in the long run.
Right.
What is the pace of innovation increase to move from these tents to the modular gigafactory architecture? Please put it in the comments. Teach John and I. And John, sometimes thinking on our feet, we come up with the best ideas. Can I pose that question to you? What do you think it could be, or do you know?
Wow. That, when you put it that way, it actually, okay. So we've got the Giga Texas, for example. It's essentially a gigantic box that's a huge volume. So it's 80 feet tall and almost a mile long and quarter mile wide, whatever that, So essentially within that space, it seems like what you can do is put up the tents. It's just all within one. Like if you build this thing right, and it's just kind of an open floor plan, I think you've talked before about if you build, the traditional thing, like you want to put in a heavy robot. So you pour concrete, you put this thing in, it's locked in place. You have to tear that sucker out if you want to move it. But if things can be agile in there and it's just basically a giant open space, but with a Z dimension as well. So, again, you got the batteries, you jelly roll them, you just drop them straight down into the next thing. And if they need to move, they just move over someplace else and they drop down there instead. So in my mind, it gives you better environmental control. And if it's an open floor plan, that's one of
That
those
may
things that
be
until
it.
you can actually do a factory tour and walk through it as it's working, it's hard to know.
It may be environmental buffering, planning for potential increased extreme weather. That actually could be it. These sprung tents are phenomenal,
Right.
but and they are insulated or can be, but maybe there's even higher wind ratings available, more severe weather buffering, more extreme heat and cold swings. Maybe they can handle more ice buildup. Also, Boca Chica has much more extreme weather on average than Fremont, California.
I was going to say, we're also moving
moving
from the Bay Area of California, which has really, really nice weather, to Texas, which gets ridiculously hot in the summer, to Berlin, which is raining all the time. So maybe it just is an environmental necessity that you need to have something that's a little bit more environmentally controlled in those.
I like how you put it, John. Maybe this is the big envelope that you can put tents inside. That actually might be part of what's going on. So here is one that resonates with me. I wonder what we'll see in the comments.
Right. Yeah, I'll be curious. I mean, it was totally just speculation from the outside, but that's what I would guess. And I think part of that comes from me growing up in Ohio, where the weather kind of sucks. So, I'm like, man, a tent would be great for about 4 months out of the year there. And the rest of the year it'd be like, nah. So,
hey, John, as we move towards the end, can you tell me more about your consulting company?
This isn't consulting. This is actually a software company. So we're manufacturing a product. So yeah, it's Artomatic.
Artomatic.
Yeah.
What are the products or product? What's the lead product for Artomatic?
So our first product, and we have a bunch more on the roadmap, is a weight painting solution for 3-dimensional meshes. So if you build a 3D, that's my thing. That's what I teach, is 3D animation. So if you imagine you built me out of polygons, so like here I am, you have to put a skeleton in me, and then you have to make the skeleton move me. And there's a piece of that puzzle which takes, speaking of waiting and sucking time and all that stuff, it takes a human being about 15 hours to do the work for every single model. And you start multiplying that out like by a feature film or a game or whatever it is, you're like, holy crap, that's a lot of man hours that have been, or human hours that have been spent working on this thing. So we do it in less than a second. So what that goes, and I will, just to throw this in here, what we are allowing is speaking of that sort of sunk cost fallacy, it's like, holy crap, I just spent 15 hours working on this. Do not change this thing on me. That's the way it is. And they're like, no, we want the cheek to be bigger or something. And they're like, no, do not change this, right? But if you can do it in a second, you're agile. Your 3D production pipeline is suddenly agile, and you're like, oh, I want to do this. Sure, let's try it. And then click, and you're like, nope, that doesn't work. Let's try this one. Click, nope, that doesn't work. So suddenly you go to something where you can become much more experimental. So yeah, that's our goal, and we're going to expand from there. So
genius.
Well,
genius. Thank you for reducing the cost to make change and bringing agility to yet another function of the industry.
That's actually kind of our goal. I mean, literally in real time, I'm realizing that this actually ties completely into what you're doing. So I'm like, but like our whole goal is to make all of these products, to make the 3D production pipeline agile, to allow, what do you call that? Known stable interfaces. To have the capability of putting pieces together, doing it if you want to, not doing it if you don't want to, automating whatever pieces you want to. So, it's hopefully, but so that's why, like, I actually really am interested for selfish reasons about this, because it's like, man, if we can get this sort of DSM thing up and running at the same time as the product, then we're talking, because then this thing is just, it's validating itself as it goes.
Well, that's where your IP value gets multiplied and multiplied again. I mean, that is the win. And in fact, anything without that win means the company isn't just buying your product, they're also buying the people in the company, which is what an acquisition currently has to mean. And that is actually more expensive. Vetting your HR, it slows down the purchasing process. What's their contract? What kind of NDA are they under? And you start to get into the abusive legal policies where you try to make the NDA difficult to read and understand, so people don't understand that they're actually, their mind is trying to be sold as if they don't own it, and just really inhuman practices. That all goes away when you have the rules engine continuing to get smarter. One, that's the really cool thing. It's not set in stone, but already at a functioning level without a human in the loop. Right. That's when you can just sell the product, when the entire process can be run without a human in the loop. Wow. As long as it meets the known stable interface. And what known stable interfaces do is they show you your growth path for the company.
Right.
Here is the set of interfaces that we can execute with no human in the loop to our definition of done. Right. So if we're funded at X, we can grow it to here, and here's the industries we can support. Agile business models, I think, are not clearly understood by most of the population yet. And they're so disruptive and yummy.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. So, wow, that's just, I have one more question. I know we've been talking over an hour and I've got to let you go because you've got your day to go through, but I want to talk about emergent self-organization. I feel like that's the ultimate. You've got these hexagons. I mean, again, using Tesla as the example, but anything would work. You've got these hexagons of production. You've got things with known stable interfaces that are coming in and out of these. And it allows you to have 5 different battery production things simultaneously and go like, oh, that's cool. That works. Fire it out. How does that self-organization happen? or do you see it happen?
Yeah. It happens naturally until people are told they have to wait for direction. We look at preschoolers and they've almost never been told you have to wait as a class. I mean, the concept of education in class hasn't been steamrolled their creativity yet.
Right.
And they dynamically form groups. The members of the groups, especially in preschool, change in real time. Already you start to form cliques once you're a little older than that because of the training, not because of the age. And they don't have a leader. Someone's like, let's play this game. And they do. And then someone else says, and now there's this rule. And then they do. And it's very fluid. That seems to happen for adults too. First day in the factory, whatever instruction people were given, they're in a holding pattern around that instruction. So the fewer instructions, the less holding pattern. And instead, if it's something like, if this light's green, do the best you can. If that's your instruction, you're like, okay, well,
I don't even know what it is yet.
What can you do? What can you, the light's green, there's cars. and you get radical self-organization because no one told you not to.
Okay.
What you never want to do is say, wait for instruction. But what you want is a fast rollback. And what's my current understanding of what makes that work well is a definition of ready and a definition of done. If this light's green, we think this is ready for humans. Humans do good human things. And if this light's green, it's really not a light, it's a heat map. But to simplify the idea, if this light's green, the definition of done light, you did something good. And what good means can change dynamically in real time. The Pavlovian dog at a dumb level, but we can be a lot cooler than that. And humans in this area, this is an opportunity. The only reasons you have humans is because you want creativity and dynamism.
Right.
Otherwise, there'd be a set of gears. You'd have this wonderful ringing bell glockenspiel thing. The only reason we have humans is because you want change. You want innovation. So group of humans. Here's your definition of ready. Here's your definition of done. Do good. Okay.
Wow. But so that really backs things up. And the definition of ready and the definition of done, down to an incredibly granular level, that's where all of the real work comes in. That is digital self-management. What is ready? What is done? In a very, very detailed way of thinking about it. And that's how machines are like, oh, that's done because it's checked off all the 27 boxes that need to be checked off for this thing to be done. So yeah. Wow. But that does mean an awful lot of front end. It means a ton of front end work to create this, to come up with the expert, even to understand what it is, the metrics that you're measuring.
How it appears to have emerged in Tesla. I was not in Tesla continuously. I met with some people in 2010. I didn't become an employee till 2020.
Right.
But what appears to have happened is you did just start work, right? Because there wasn't anything. And at some point, I think very early on,
right,
software started to be developed. And I imagine it was a lot like, here's a monitor with a green light.
Right.
And it's always green because it's not measuring something. And what we can at least is turn it red when there's a known rejection.
Okay.
And maybe there's a human there who's like, well, I mean, doing stuff, but I can, like an and-on light is this idea. You know, I can make it yellow, I can make it red. Right. Okay, well, can the software detect any of the times that it should be red or yellow or green?
Right. And
expanding that group. The reason I stress this here is I definitely don't want people to come away from Dr. Know-It-All and me saying, I need to have an 8-year time in a cave developing this in a waterfall vacuum before I ever show it to. That's not how this should work. It should be, here's the last 7 minutes of me banging around with a group of other people who are working there. Right. And now let's react to it. Okay, that actually made everything worse. Let's bang for another 7 minutes, change who's banging, and I'm going to cheer for them. Let's do it in a mob. I mean, that's what you want. And in less than 12 hours, you know, however long the caffeine lasts, in less than 12 hours, there's something that might be marginally useful. And you have an idea of what to try tomorrow when you come back. That is the only way to make this work.
Okay. No, that actually really helps, because it was one of those like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed by you look at the way something like Tesla is now and you're like, well, holy crap, that's it's Mount Everest. It's like, no. We have to start with like this pebble and we're going to build Mount Everest. We don't go straight to Mount Everest. Otherwise we're crushed. So
I agree with what you just said. I think that's probably true.
Okay.
One of the reasons I love Wait But Why so much, Tim Urban, is he has this Your Life in Weeks chart. And I've got one. Unfortunately, it's not posted here. I'm actually hoping to make a bigger one.
Right.
And you can experiment. So now this is my mind added onto this concoction that Tim Urban popularized. Thank you so much. Right. And that's add a definition of ready and definition of done to your birth and death. What's important to me? What's different because I was born? What's different because I died? Okay. And try to make that more and more interesting and meaningful to you. This is how you figure out your ethics. I mean, that's it.
So I've always said on my headstone, I want one word. I want unfinished on my headstone. But maybe I need to rethink this, because maybe I need to say, what is the definition of done? Where do I need to get before I get there? So
then you can add it to smaller increments. Like, okay, my 20s were, I'm past 20, I'm 42. My 20s were, well, what do I think my 50s are? And then you definitely want this to be whiteboard. You want to be able to move this around, right? Then per week or per day. And sometimes you're like, well, next summer and it's a big chunk, but sometimes it's today I will, and you try. And, even that totally changes. Waterfall doesn't work, right? You can't budget this in advance.
Agile life. You're trying to value add continuously to your life.
So we can be intentional about what our lifespan means.
Right. I'm convinced that's one of the things that makes human beings awesome, is the fact that we're mortal and we know it. Because if I was actually talking to my son, he was like, if you could get a genie and you could wish to be immortal, I was like, no, I don't think I'd want to be, because I'd have no motivation. Like, it's like, there's an exit and you better get some crap done before you get to that exit, because there's no stopping it. It's coming for you one of these days. So,
well, if truth equals beauty, which is an unprovable axiom,
right?
Then we could say maximization of truth and maximization of beauty, and that is eternal.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. Wow. Should we stop there? Because that's a pretty cool stopping place. I love it. John, unless you have another comment to add to this whole thing. Okay.
It is my honor and privilege to rock with you, like every single time. You are phenomenal. Your background, your skills base, your experience base is so wide ranging and deep. It is unreal to hang out with you. What a privilege.
That's the reason why I got the moniker Dr. Know-It-All. So I'm like, I know enough about everything to be dangerous. That's about it. So Anyway, I was going to say the same about you. It is such a privilege to talk to you. And I'm already going like, man, what are we going to talk about next time? But, I don't want to overstay my welcome in terms of chats, but whenever you want to next time, we will definitely do it, because I have a blast talking to you, and I can't wait till the next time we get to see each other in person too, because that'll be awesome. In the meantime, everybody, thank you. We'll give a little cheer to Joe, and again, check out all of his information, books, consulting stuff. I mean, whatever, you can find it. And you're yes, there you go, at Joe Justice. Definitely good stuff on Twitter too. So there you go. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Cheers.